You know, when we think of evil in the 20th century, one name just about always pops into your head: Adolf Hitler. The story we all learn is pretty simple. He was a monster, the singular force of pure evil. But what if that's not the whole picture? Let's dive into a trickier question. Was the villain we all know actually a product of the system he came from? So, get this. On his deathbed, Hitler reportedly said these words. It's a chillingly confident thing to say, right? It really makes you wonder, what on earth did he think he was right about? And why, all these decades later, are there still people who agree with him? This is where we're going to start digging. So, this is the big question we're tackling. Was Hitler some kind of freak anomaly, a one-of-a-kind monster? Or was he actually the predictable result of a very specific set of circumstances? A villain created by a broken system that was just waiting for someone exactly like him to come along. To really get the man, you first have to understand the world that made him. I mean, his journey from some random soldier to an absolute tyrant, that wasn't an accident. No way. It was a calculated climb to the top, made possible by a nation that was completely on its knees. It really all kicks off right here with the Treaty of Versailles. Yeah, on paper, it was a peace treaty, but in reality, it was a punishment that just broke Germany's back. It slapped them with such massive repair payments that the nation's economy, its military, and its pride were just utterly shattered. Now, what this slide shows you is basically the perfect storm. You've got hyperinflation so out of control that people were literally using wheelbarrows of cash just to buy a loaf of bread. You've got this deep, burning anger over that treaty. And the government in charge, nobody trusted them. People saw them as totally weak. So Germany wasn't just looking for a new leader, they were desperate for a savior. And Hitler, well, he masterfully played on this desperation. After a failed government takeover in 1923, he uses his prison time to write his game plan, Mein Kampf. Then, boom, the Great Depression hits in 29 and throws Germany into even more chaos, which only made his crazy promises sound more appealing. His rivals, thinking they could totally control him, made him chancellor in 1933. It turned out to be a fatal, history-altering mistake. In less than a year, he'd torn down their democracy and declared himself the supreme leader. Okay, so we've seen how the system kind of set the stage for the man. Now let's start deconstructing some of the myths around him, and we're going to start with the biggest one of all, the idea that he was the deadliest mass murderer in history. The numbers, well, they might tell a very different story. Right? This is what we all think. It's the name that's basically synonymous with genocide. When we hear mass murder, we see his face. But let's actually look at the data for a second. This table is, well, it's shocking. While Hitler's regime was responsible for the horrific deaths of millions, the death tolls under Stalin's Soviet Union and Mao's China were significantly higher. I mean, just in terms of pure numbers, Hitler isn't even at the top of the list. Let's just sit with this number for a second. Up to 40 million people died under Mao Zedong. A lot of them during the Great Leap Forward, a man-made famine so catastrophic it's considered the biggest in human history. We're talking people forced to eat tree leaves and, in some truly horrifying cases, soil and human bones just to survive. So this brings up a huge question. If we're just going by the numbers, why does all the historical focus, all the condemnation, fall so heavily on Hitler, while these other guys who caused even more death are often just footnotes in popular history? Why is that? And this quote really gets to the heart of the argument. History is a story, and the winners of World War II needed to justify their own actions, some of which, by the way, also led to immense civilian death. By creating a single supervillain, they could frame themselves as the undeniable heroes. All right, on to the second big deconstruction. You can't separate the Holocaust from Hitler's legacy. But the hatred that fueled it, was that something he just invented out of thin air? Or was he just pouring gasoline on a fire that had already been burning for centuries? Let's really dig into this. The story we're often told makes it seem like anti-Semitism was this uniquely Nazi thing in the 20th century. But the historical record, it tells a much deeper and, frankly, a much more uncomfortable story. I mean, just look at this timeline. For centuries, Jewish communities were systematically kicked out of nearly every corner of Europe. This wasn't a new idea Hitler had. It was an ancient hatred rooted in centuries of religious fights and economic jealousy that was simmering all across the continent for thousands of years. So here's the crucial point. Hitler didn't invent anti-Semitism. He weaponized it. He took this hate that was already there, already widespread, and he turned it into a powerful political weapon. By blaming this tiny minority for all of Germany's problems, the lost war, the tanking economy, he gave a frustrated, angry population a simple target for all their rage. And finally, let's talk about World War II itself. Was it really just the result of one man's ambition, or was it a global catastrophe that had a lot of different authors? The simple story is Hitler started the war. The end. But the reality, it is so much more complicated than that. It wasn't just one man's will. It was a total cascade of failures, bad calls, and simmering tensions all across the globe. Think of it like a recipe for absolute disaster. The Treaty of Versailles was the bitter first ingredient. The Great Depression added economic desperation. You had these imperial ambitions bubbling up in Japan and Italy at the same time. And the final ingredient? Allied appeasement, where powers like Britain pretty much just gave Hitler a green light, hoping he'd just be satisfied and stop. And let's not forget who was helping him. Major international corporations, including some big American ones, were actively supporting the Nazi regime. IBM provided the tech that was used to manage the Holocaust. Henry Ford, who openly admired Hitler, got a medal from him. These weren't just bystanders, they were active, willing participants in the rise of this monster. So, let's bring this all together. What's the big takeaway here? The argument is that history isn't just a list of facts, it's a story. And every story has a good guy and a bad guy. The real question is, who gets to decide who plays which part? Okay, let's be absolutely crystal clear about one thing. Understanding the context is not in any way an excuse. The Holocaust, the genocides, the war, these were horrific, inexcusable acts. Nothing can ever justify what happened, period. But that doesn't mean he was the only villain. Other leaders had staggering body counts. Other nations were driven by their own imperial greed. Other huge corporations got rich off the war machine. There were a lot of players in this global tragedy. And that leaves us with one last, really provocative question. Was Hitler the greatest evil of the 20th century? Or was he simply the villain who lost the war and was therefore left all alone in the spotlight, conveniently hiding the complex web of failures, ambitions, and shared responsibilities that plunged the entire world into darkness? That's something to think about.